first time, Africa, through South Africa's G20 presidency, is at the center of global economic governance. The Sanlam ESG Barometer released the B20 Policy Impact Special Report, which is meant to be a roadmap for how Africa's business community can turn B20 recommendations into tangible, lasting outcomes. This week, I have the Chief Sustainability Officer at Sanlam, Abel Sakhau, joining me to give an in-depth outlook on the research conducted. Abel, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Kerry. How are you?
Well, what inspired Sanlam to commission this B20 Policy Impact Report?
You might remember that Sanlam, on an annual basis, we publish our ESG Barometer, which previously has been focusing on understanding how listed companies in South Africa and Kenya embed ESG and create additionality in terms of impact. So this year, we then realized that because the B20 and the G20 are critical forums that are happening on an African continent and for the first time, and in the same space of impact, we wanted to understand whether the recommendations that comes out of the B20 tend to result in real life impact. And we then commissioned this report to say, instead of focusing on companies, let's focus on the recommendations that comes out of the P20, but let's also go back 3 years in Brazil, Indonesia, and India, and check what happened in the B20s, whether some of those recommendations ended up in the G20 communique, and also are they resulting in real life impact as we speak today. And that was the motivation. And I think for Sanlam, it's important for us to have done that because we operate out of 26 African countries. So it's important that when such conversations are happening and such initiatives are taken on the continent, we should be in the room and we should be able to then support and make input in such discussions, because at the end of the day, Africa then needs to benefit and the voice of Africa needs to be elevated in such forums so that it's not just an echo chamber happening without critical business sector that will help in driving some of this initiative.
Abel, the report examines 3 years of B20 presidencies, Indonesia, India and Brazil, as you mentioned. What are some of the key findings from these nations?
Yeah, I think what we've discovered with the research that we did is that the take-up of the recommendations varies from the 3 countries, with Brazil having received most of their recommendations being adopted by the B20. They issued 10 recommendations, and 10 of those recommendations were adopted, 7 partially, and 3 were fully adopted. But what comes out of the report is that for the recommendations to end up in the G20 communique or adoption, there must be a clear alignment with the G20 priorities, And also, we also noted that the recommendation needs to be specific, in terms of when you implement it, what are the financial commitments that are required? Because, you can't just make recommendations and then you leave portion of the work to be done by the G20. And the other aspect is that those recommendations also needs to have tangible KPIs, to say once we implement, how are we going to track success? And also they must be then supported by a legacy project, for continuity perspective. So those are the things that we picked up out of the report to say, it's good enough to make recommendations, but do those recommendations fit some of those 6 criteria? And the last one from the 6th one is then the aspect that says they should address global challenges. They can never be a South African specific challenge or Africa specific challenge. They have to address a global challenge that all nations will be able to relate to that. So that's some of the insight that came out of this report.
So then how is South Africa's B20 different and what opportunities does it hold?
So South Africa B20 it comes at a time when, we all know in terms of global geopolitics and the challenges that we have in terms of multilateralism, where countries are looking inwards, and choosing not to go into corporations and open for trade when our countries are saying, let's start first with us, and then the rest of the world will then look to the rest of the world after we have solved our problems. And we know that the South African presidency is big in terms of global cooperation. So the South African presidency is important because it's going to remind world leaders that you can never solve global challenges sitting alone in focusing only on internal politics of your country. You need to collaborate, you need cooperation between government and the private sector. So I think that South African presidency is critical in the sense that it's just going to say to the world leaders, let's go back into multilateralism because it has worked before. We just need to make sure that we can solve some of the challenges that comes with it. There is no solution that's going to be better if we are not going to cooperate together. And we know, our president is quite big in terms of that.
Abel, how can businesses and government then work together to ensure B20 recommendations are implemented if you look at some of these historical lessons and where we are now?
Yeah, I think in South Africa we were quite fortunate because before the G20 and the B20 came, we were already on that path because we had a couple of challenges. You would know that we had challenges with load shedding, we have challenges with infrastructure, we have challenges with supply chain, the ports are not working at an efficient rate. And business and government were already working together in a partnership to solve some of these systemic challenges that are facing the country and the economy. And now South Africa has got an opportunity to take those lessons that happened prior to B20 presidency to say, how then do we take some of those lessons and how do we take some of those activities that we use to cooperate into these B20 recommendations. And then we can drive some of the successes that we want to see out of the B20 and the G20. For example, I'll give you an example. We know we've got challenges with youth unemployment. And if government and business, through the B20 recommendations, focused on challenges, providing solutions to the youth unemployment, based on what we've previously done with load shedding. Today we're no longer talking about load shedding because government and business came into the room and they managed to find a solution to say, how then do we solve this challenge that is not only going to affect South Africa, but it's going to affect the entire continent and globally also. So I think for us, we already have mechanisms that we can use to make sure that the B20 recommendations, as they move into the G20 consideration, we already have structures that we can use to embed some of those recommendations so that it does not feel like we are starting new things, but it's a continuation of what we've been doing so excellently in the previous years.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but it sounds like this report has some fascinating insights and also recommendations for South Africa in the B20 and G20 arena. Thank you very much, Abel, for joining us.
Thank you.
That was the Chief Sustainability Officer of Sanlam, Abel Sakhau, sharing key insights about the latest B20 Policy Impact Special Report conducted by Sanlam ESG Barometer.